Hey guys, today I'm going to talk to you guys about Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. So we're going to talk about the differences between their two ideas. This should be a pretty easy, short assignment, so just follow along and then fill this in on your paper as we go, okay? All right, so let's look at the differences between Hobbes and Locke. So you got a T-chart in your notes, and it looks just like this. So first thing we're going to talk about is the ideal form of government. So Thomas Hobbes would argue for an absolute monarch. So remember he talked about the Leviathan, okay, so that the king is the head of the monster and then the people make up the body, okay? So one cannot exist without the other. So what the head has to do right by the body, and then the body has to do right by the head. And then John Locke, his ideal form of government is a democracy. So remember he talked about protecting rights, and he talked about fairness, and he would definitely, I think he would like our form of government, which is not a democracy, but it's a democratic republic. So it's a form of democracy, but it's not a true democracy. As far as natural rights go, Thomas Hobbes would say that people are born with rights that they then surrender to the monarch for protection. And he calls this a social contract. So this is really important. So he's the first one to come up with what is called social contract theory. And basically the social contract is the idea that we live in this country. We are citizens of this country. Therefore, we submit to the laws that are made by this country, by the existing government. So we have signed a social contract just by being citizens where we agree to be governed by the existing government, okay? So we will surrender our rights to, in this case, a monarch, in order to allow him to protect us, okay? Now, John Locke says that people are born with inalienable rights. Okay, so there's certain rights that we have, and those can't be taken away. Okay, so you get these rights just by being born, just by being a person. You get these rights. So those are life, liberty, and property. So you have the right to life, you have the right to be free, and then you have the right to keep your own property. All right, and so this obviously becomes the basis of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, so human nature. So Thomas Hobbes and John Locke are vastly different on human nature. So Thomas Hobbes would say that people are wicked, selfish, and cruel, and act on behalf of their own self-interest. So he argued that life was terrible, brutish, and short in a state of nature, okay, where, remember, the state of nature being where people are just people. There's no institutions, there's no church, there's no government, there's no nothing, there's just people just being people. And in that state of nature, that's what he said, life is nasty, brutish, and short, I think is his direct quote, nasty, brutish, and short. But he says that people are wicked and selfish and cruel, and that makes it a nasty, brutish, short life. Okay? As far as John Locke, he is total opposite. He says people are good, and that people are able to learn from their experiences. So he calls this a blank slate. So he has a blank slate theory. It basically says that when you're born, you are born a blank slate. Everything that you know and that you learn shape who you become. Okay, so he would, when we talk about like nature versus nurture, he would be more of the nurture side. So Thomas Hobbes might be more the nature side, where you're determined, like your genetic makeup is determined before what you're going to do is determined by your genetic makeup. Where John Locke would say what you end up doing is based on your experiences and what you learn. Now, it's probably a combination of both, but John Locke believes that people are generally good, okay, where Thomas Hobbes says, no, they're awful. People are awful. Next one, can people govern themselves? Thomas Hobbes would say, no, they cannot be trusted to govern themselves because they're wicked and selfish and cruel. Where John Locke would say, yes, they can govern themselves. So people with the right information can make good decisions. Okay, and so that's the important thing, is with the right information, people will make good decisions. And that's why he supports democracy and why Thomas Hobbes supports an absolute monarch. Next part is purpose of government. So Thomas Hobbes says the purpose of government is to keep law and order. So remember, he said that, we created government basically because we were destroying each other. And so we wanted to protect ourselves from each other. And so that's why we have a government. Where John Locke would say that the purpose of government is to protect individual liberties and rights. And notice it says individual, not the majority. So he was very much about protecting everyone. Okay, so it wasn't mob rule. Okay, so like in a true democracy, that's when you see more mob rule. So in our form of government, we protect minorities just as we protect majorities. And so that's where those individual liberties come into play. All right, and then the last one, what can people do if the government fails to protect their rights? Thomas Hobbes would say, can't really do anything. People, if you have an abusive monarch, then better hope he dies quick so the next one comes along and maybe he's not as abusive. All right, or you can go move somewhere else where there's not an abusive monarch, but because of social contract, you agreed to be governed by this guy who exists. So that's just kind of how that goes. John Locke would say if the government isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing, then you should revolt against it. So if you have an abusive government, then you should revolt against that government. And that's, once again, the basis of the Declaration of Independence. So in the first part of the Declaration, Thomas Jefferson talks about we have rights. The second part says, here's all the ways, there's 27 different ways that King George has violated those rights. And then the last part is this right here. People should revolt against an abusive government. We've established that King George is abusive. Thomas Hobbes would say, well, there's nothing you can do about it. But John Locke says, yes, you should revolt against that and make a government that would protect your rights. And so that's exactly what we did. Okay, so those are the differences between Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. There are two questions here on the bottom of your page, or on the maybe on the second page of this. So I want you to answer them. So I'm going to just show you the questions, and then you can answer them. So the first one is, do you agree with John Locke or Thomas Hobbes on the nature of human beings? So answer that, yes or no, and then explain at least 4 or 5 sentences why you think that Thomas Hobbes or John Locke is right. And then the next question is, should people overthrow their government if it is not protecting their natural rights? So once again, yes or no there, and then I want 4 or 5 sentences explaining why. Okay, so is it okay to overthrow your government if it's not doing its job? Why or why not? Okay. All right, make sure you get that all shared with me once you're done, and I hope you guys all have a great day.